They called it a realignment. That's what the new owner said as he slid the paper across the table without looking me in the eye. We're adjusting compensation structures across all legacy roles. Your new offer is here. I'd been with the company for 14 years. I trained most of the team. I kept operations running during 2 recessions. I'd pulled double shifts, solved supplier breakdowns at 2 a.m., and once hand-delivered a critical part in a snowstorm just so a client wouldn't pull the contract. And this man, who'd been here 14 weeks, thought I'd nod politely to a 40% pay cut. I looked at the number, then looked at him. And I remember thinking, you really have no idea who you're dealing with. What would you do? What would you do if the company you helped build, brick by brick, decided you were suddenly too expensive to keep whole? Would you take less just to stay? Would you beg for scraps in a room you helped furnish? Or would you walk away? Even if you had no backup plan? Even if it meant starting over from nothing, just to protect something even more valuable? Your worth. This isn't a story about getting fired. This is a story about what happens when a woman says, no break time. Point threes. No to being underpaid. No to being overlooked. No to being punished for staying loyal. And what came next? Let's just say he thought I'd leave quietly. He had no idea. I was just getting started. I started at Hillridge Components when my hair was still dark brown and my knees didn't ache in the morning. It wasn't glamorous. Industrial parts rarely are. We built high-tolerance gears and fittings for farming equipment, things most people never see but rely on every day. I was hired as a front desk admin. Small office, break time, 0.3s for 6 people. Coffee machine that barely worked. The kind of place where if the phone rang while someone was microwaving leftovers, break time, you answered it, whether it was your job or not. But I didn't mind. In fact, break time, 0.5s, so I thrived. I asked questions, took notes, watched how things moved, how they failed, how they could move better. 6 months in, I rewrote our parts ordering system on my own time, saved us nearly $12,000 that quarter. By year 2, I was overseeing inventory. By year 5, I was operations manager. There were no fancy titles, break time B3s, no corner office. But people came to me when things got messy because they knew I could fix it. The old CEO, Tom, wasn't flashy break time 0.5s, but he valued loyalty. He'd say things like, I'd rather have someone who shows up at 90% every day than someone who burns out trying to be perfect. Tom knew my kid's name. He asked how my mom was doing when she had surgery. He let me leave early when I needed to break time 0.5s. He never made me feel guilty for being human. But Tom retired, and Hillridge got bought out. The new owner, break time, 0.5s, Alex Barrington, break time, 0.5s, and didn't shake hands. He made calendar invites. He showed up with consultants, break time 0.5s, spreadsheets, break time 0.5s, and a mandate. Modernize break time, Coring 3s. Monetize break time, 1 Minimize break time, doing 3s. He was mid-30s, Harvard MBA, glossy suit, razor-sharp smile that didn't reach his eyes. On his first day, he asked to walk the floor but didn't remember anyone's name the next. He loved numbers, hated nuance, and worse, he didn't ask questions to learn. He asked them to expose what you didn't know. At first, I stayed out of his way. Let him do his leadership reimagining while I kept the gears turning, literally and metaphorically. But I noticed things. He started hosting closed-door meetings without me, on systems I built. He moved budgetary control to someone fresh out of business school, who once asked me if a bolt size was measured in grams. He started referring to me as a legacy role. We've got some bloated overhead in legacy ops. We'll need to trim the inefficiencies. That word, legacy, I knew what it meant. It wasn't about age. It was about expendability. In his eyes, I was a line item, an outdated model that cost more than it was worth. But here's the thing. He didn't know that the quietest person in the room was also the one who knew how everything worked, not just the systems, but the people, the relationships, the pain points no software could fix. He thought he was running a machine, but this place, it ran on people, and the moment he decided to cut me down by 40% was the moment he lit the fuse on his own foundation. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I smiled, walked out of that meeting, and started building something of my own, one step at a time. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. 12. That's how long it took for Alex to unravel 14 years of work, of loyalty, of showing up before sunrise and leaving after the cleaning crew. He handed me a revised offer printed on corporate letterhead. No eye contact, just bullet points. Effective immediately, your base salary will be adjusted by 40%. Benefits will remain unchanged. Your new title will be Operations Coordinator. Coordinator. I wasn't even mad. I folded the paper neatly, like it was a receipt for a shirt I'd never wear. I tucked it in my bag, and I looked up, calm, steady, and asked one question. Does this apply to everyone in leadership? He hesitated, shifted in his chair. Just legacy admin roles. We need to be leaner. Translation, just you. Just the ones who remember when this place was run with grit, not graphs. I nodded, thanked him, and walked out. No drama, no tears. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it hum like the machines I'd spent over a decade tending. I kept thinking, how did we get here? How did we let someone with no history walk in and decide who mattered? At 3:17 a.m., I got up. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Because if I was going down, I wasn't going quietly. First, I made a copy of everything I'd built. My process manuals, the supplier contact sheets with personal notes, troubleshooting guides, the unwritten rules that only I knew because I lived them for 14 years. I didn't steal anything proprietary. I wasn't stupid, but I did reclaim what I had created, what no one else understood how to replicate. I labeled it, in case of emergency, how to keep Hillridge running. Then I opened a blank document, named it Plan B. 2 days later, I met with Lara, our finance manager, at a diner 5 blocks from the office. She'd been there nearly as long as me. Kind, sharp, underpaid like the rest of us. I slid the offer across the table, watched her jaw tighten. "They're cutting you?" she asked. "After everything?" I nodded. Then I pulled out my second folder. Inside, a list of local small manufacturers, independent suppliers, new startups struggling to manage operations without the budget for full-time leadership. These places are drowning. They don't need CEOs. They need people who know how to run things. I'm going to consult, build them systems, train their teams, scale them without crushing their people. She looked at me like I'd just handed her a map out of a burning building. "Do you need help?" I smiled. "I need a numbers person I trust. You in?" She said yes before the coffee even arrived. Back at Hillridge, things started shifting fast. The staff caught wind of the realignment. Whispers floated through the break room. Alex announced new KPIs and accountability systems, but he couldn't explain how to read the production dashboard. The new HR assistant asked me where the emergency exit binders were. I said, politely, "You'll have to ask whoever's coordinating operations now," and I walked away. But the real betrayal came 3 days before my last day. I was finishing up a project handoff when I heard voices in the conference room. The door was cracked. Alex and someone from the investor group. They were reviewing resumes for my replacement, but not for my role, for my salary. "We can hire 2 juniors for what she cost us," Alex said. "I've got candidates lined up already. We'll just plug them in. Processes are all in place." I wanted to laugh. There were no processes. What they had was muscle memory, mine. I stood outside that door, back straight, jaw tight, and I realized something. Alex didn't just want to cut costs. He wanted to erase the history of everyone who came before him, so he could pretend he built it all. He wasn't downsizing, he was whitewashing. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and finished the final piece of my exit plan, a digital folder. Inside, one single-page document, a timeline of everything I'd handled in my last 2 years, operations crises avoided, revenue recovered through process fixes, client retention percentages that improved after I restructured support. Just facts, dates, outcomes. I titled it, What You'll Notice When I'm Gone. Then I scheduled it to send automatically 48 hours after my last clock out, to Alex, to HR, to the board, not out of spite, out of clarity, out of dignity, out of strategy. I didn't ask for applause when I left, but I did leave a trail. And when the cracks started forming, they followed it right back to me. My last day came without ceremony. No farewell card, no office-wide email, no speech. Just a half-hearted good luck from Alex and a nod from HR, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I cleaned out my desk in under 10 minutes. No tears, no theatrics, just quiet dignity, stacked in folders and a reusable coffee cup. Before I left, I walked through the factory floor one last time. Every machine I'd ever helped calibrate, every station I'd reorganized to reduce accidents, every person who'd ever trusted me with a problem they couldn't fix on their own. They didn't throw a party, but they met me with nods, handshakes, and, most powerfully, eye contact. The kind that says, we saw what they did, and we know who really ran this place. 3 days after I left, the first email came in. It was from Noah, the shift supervisor. He said the system for reordering raw materials had stopped working. Apparently, the 2 juniors Alex hired to replace me hadn't realized there were manual overrides during seasonal delays. The factory had run out of key inventory. They were days behind schedule. Orders were piling up, and clients were furious. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because 1 week later, I got a message from Claire, a former client I'd built a strong relationship with, one of our top 3 accounts. Hey, just heard you're no longer with Hillridge. I've got 2 questions. 1, is that true? 2, are you available? She wasn't the only one. Within 3 weeks, 4 former clients reached out. Not because I pitched them, but because they felt my absence in the quality of what they were getting now. Meanwhile, Laura and I had been quietly building. We rented a co-working space. Nothing fancy, just clean desks, good coffee, and reliable Wi-Fi. We called it PivotWorks, a consultancy firm that helps small manufacturing businesses streamline their systems without burning out their teams. No investors, no buzzwords. Just real solutions built from real experience. Our first client was a friend of Claire's. Then came another through Lara's church. By month 2, we had 6 paying clients and more inquiries than we could handle. But that wasn't even the twist. The twist came when Hillridge accidentally CC'd me on a supplier negotiation chain. Apparently, one of the new hires had used an old email template with my address still auto-filled. The thread showed that not only had order accuracy dropped, but that the company was about to lose a $1 million deal because they couldn't guarantee delivery times anymore. They tried to blame it on supply chain volatility, but that deal, it was with a company I'd personally onboarded, built trust with, nurtured through 2 failed product cycles. They weren't walking away because of shipping delays. They were walking away because I was gone. Now here's where things escalated. Alex scheduled a meeting with Lara. She still had access to a few shared vendor dashboards, since they hadn't transitioned accounts properly. He asked her if I would consider returning temporarily as a consultant just until things stabilized. His tone, she said, was professional but strained, like someone who just realized the roof is leaking and they fired the person who built it. Lara told him she'd pass the message along. She didn't, because I already knew my answer. Instead, I sent Alex an invoice, Not for work rendered, but for future consulting services. Flat rate, 4 weeks. No guarantees. Triple my former salary. With a note at the bottom, value never disappears. It simply relocates. He didn't respond, but I didn't need him to, because 2 days later, Tom, the old CEO, called. He'd heard the whispers, the fallout, the confusion. "You doing okay?" he asked. I laughed. "Better than okay." He chuckled. "They thought you were just part of the furniture." They forgot the furniture held up the whole floor. A week later, the biggest twist hit. One of Hillridge's board members, an older woman named Ruth, whom I'd only met twice, reached out privately. She said she'd been watching the chaos unfold. She said my exit memo, "What you'll notice when I'm gone," had been passed around the board like a ghost story. She asked if I'd ever considered sitting on an advisory board, not at Hillridge, at her company, a 40 million manufacturing group expanding nationwide. They needed someone who understood the ground floor and the big picture. She offered me a position, not a job, a seat at the table. They cut my salary thinking they could replace me. What they didn't know was that I'd already built something they couldn't copy. 3 months after I walked out of Hillridge, I stepped into a glass-walled boardroom, only this time, not as an employee, as a voting member. Ruth's offer wasn't symbolic. It came with full access, full voice, and a 6-figure compensation package. I was now advising a network of manufacturing companies that competed with the very place that once thought I was disposable. But I wasn't interested in revenge. Not really. I was interested in impact. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted someone like Alex to see my name in the industry news and realize he'd miscalculated. By fall, PivotWorks had grown faster than Lara or I imagined. We now had 7 clients under retainer, 3 part-time employees, and a wait list of companies wanting help fixing their broken back-end systems. Turns out, there's a big market for people who can build without ego. One day, I got a LinkedIn message from an account I didn't recognize at first. The profile photo was minimal, a blurry headshot, but the name? Alex Barrington. He kept it short. "Would like to connect. I may have an opportunity to run by you." No apology, no acknowledgement, just that same polished tone he used when he handed me the 40% pay cut. I didn't reply, but I looked into what was going on at Hillridge. Turns out, things had unraveled faster than expected. Client retention dropped. 2 former team leads left for one of my client companies. The junior replacements lasted less than a quarter. And worst of all, for Alex, at least, one of the investors pulled funding. They cited instability in operational leadership and loss of key institutional knowledge. Translation: you fired the wrong person. Here's where the tables really turned. One of our new clients, Millerworks, was expanding into Hillridge's old territory. Guess who used to supply them? That's right, Hillridge. Now they were coming to DSK for system redesign, staffing strategy, and a brand new logistics framework. Alex didn't just lose me, he lost the trust I carried, and that trust wasn't something you could hire back. Around that time, I ran into an old coworker, Devin, at a local cafe. He'd been one of the few mid-level managers who stayed quiet during the shakeup, trying to keep his head down and ride it out. He told me Alex had started referring to me as the ghost in the system. Apparently, people kept saying, "This wouldn't have happened if she was still here. Your name comes up every week." Devin said, "Even when you're not in the room, you're in the room." And that was when I realized I didn't need to burn anything down. I had already won, without a single press release, without a social media rant, without begging for recognition. A few weeks later, Ruth called again. She said one of her competitors was looking to fill a CEO seat, someone with both factory floor experience and strategic vision. They wanted someone seasoned, someone who understood the long game, someone who had so lived through being underestimated and still delivered results. I was on their short list. I didn't say yes. Not yet, because I had something else in mind. Laura and I had been talking about turning PivotWorks into more than a consultancy, a training hub for women 40 plus who had been passed over, pushed out, or priced down, just like I had been. Not to teach them how to fight back, but how to unbuild forward. And just before the new year, we launched the Undercurrent Project. Free workshops, mentorship, and a private community where experience was currency, not a liability. Final twist, quiet but powerful. Remember that in case of emergency folder I backed up before I left? I published an open source version of it, stripped of company-specific data, on a professional blog. It went viral in the operations world, not because it was flashy, but because it was real, and under the author bio. I signed. Written by a woman who was told she was replaceable and proved she wasn't. He offered me less, thinking I'd accept my worth was shrinking. What he didn't know was that I'd been quietly expanding, far beyond what he could ever imagine. It's funny how the quietest moments often carry the loudest victories. I still remember the first Monday I didn't wake up for Hillridge. No alarm. No rushing to beat traffic. Just morning light spilling through my kitchen window. And the sound of my own breath. Calm, unhurried, for the first time in 14 years. I didn't feel owned by anyone. Not by a title, not by a paycheck, not by a manager's mood or a corporate restructure. I was free. But freedom, I learned, is never handed to you. It's claimed. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes through fire. People ask me now, do you miss it, the job? I don't. What I miss is the purpose, knowing I was the glue, the compass, the person people turned to when things fell apart. But what I've built since leaving, it's not just purposeful, it's personal. I don't just keep systems running. I keep women from believing the lie that they are only as valuable as their last performance review. The younger version of me would have begged to stay, would have tried to prove her worth, would have shrunk herself to fit into a spreadsheet built by someone who never saw her. But the woman I became, she doesn't ask for a seat. She builds the table. She teaches other women to do the same, and she does it without apology. Ooh, there was no viral resignation letter, no mic drop moment, just one decision, repeated every day. I refuse to be devalued by people who never bothered to understand my value in the first place. I walk into rooms now, not hoping to be seen, but knowing I belong, because I earned that, not by shouting, not by burning bridges, but by knowing that the bridge I needed most was the one back to myself. Somewhere out there, someone listening to this is being asked to take less money, less space, less credit. They're being told, subtly or directly, that they're lucky to be here, that the world has changed. That loyalty doesn't matter anymore. And to that person, I want to say, you are not hard to replace because you're loud. You're hard to replace because, well, you're excellent. Because you carry the kind of wisdom that can't be taught in a weekend seminar. And if they can't see that, walk, not because you're weak, but because you've outgrown their inability to grow with you. Yes. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been asked to accept less after giving your all? Have you ever been told your loyalty was too expensive? Have you ever chosen to walk away, not out of rage, but out of respect for yourself? If so, I want to hear from you. Drop number 1 in the comments if you've ever taken a risk to reclaim your worth. And if this story hit a little too close to home, subscribe, because this space, it's not just for survivors. It's for wall builders, for people who turn disrespect into direction, for the women who were called replaceable and became irreplaceable in ways no one saw coming. Next day's story, I poured all my savings into saving our family vineyard, only to watch them name my sister CEO. But they underestimated one thing. I didn't just save the vineyard, I saved myself.